December 1350. The temperature inside your home hovers just above freezing despite the fire crackling at the center of your dirt floor. Snow is falling through a hole in your roof, landing on your children as they huddle by the flames. Your breakfast is a bowl of watery gruel that tastes of turnips in despair. Outside, wolves howl in the darkness, and you know that before spring arrives, you'll be burying at least one member of your family in frozen ground. This isn't a nightmare. This is winter in medieval Europe, where the cold season wasn't measured in months but in body counts, and where stepping outside without the right preparation could mean you'd never step inside again. Strip away everything you take for granted. Your thermostat that keeps your home at a comfortable 72 degrees, your insulated walls that block the wind, your refrigerator stocked with food from around the world, your medicine cabinet full of antibiotics and pain relievers. Replace all of it with a drafty hut made of sticks and manure, a dwindling pile of firewood that you might get executed for stealing, and the very real knowledge that a common cold could kill you before February. This was the reality that awaited every medieval peasant when October arrived and the harvest ended. Contemporary writers didn't romanticize winter. They associated it directly with old age, poverty, and death, and they weren't exaggerating. In a bad winter, 1 out of every 10 people in your village wouldn't see spring. Children routinely froze to death in their beds. Entire families resorted to eating tree bark and boiled leather just to fill their stomachs with something, anything, that might keep them alive another day. Let's start with where you'd be living, though calling it living is generous. Picture a structure that's less cozy cottage and more a badly assembled pile of sticks held together by mud, straw, and animal dung. Yes, your walls were literally made of manure mixed with clay in a construction method called wattle and daub. These walls cracked constantly as they dried, creating gaps where the December wind whistled through like nature's cruelest joke. The thatch roof above your head was thick, maybe a foot of compressed straw and reeds, but it had a massive hole cut into the center. This wasn't architectural incompetence. Without that hole, the smoke from your fire would suffocate you long before the cold could finish the job. But it meant that snow, rain, and ice fell directly into your living space. Medieval illustrations actually show peasants sitting indoors with snow accumulating on their shoulders while they desperately try to warm themselves by inadequate fires. One 15th century drawing depicts peasants literally lifting their tunics to expose their bare skin to the flames because modesty was a luxury you couldn't afford when frostbite threatened every extremity. Your floor was packed earth covered with straw that gradually transformed into a putrid mulch of mud, food scraps, animal waste, and things you didn't want to think about too carefully. Windows, if you were fortunate enough to have them, were small openings covered with oiled cloth that let in a dim, greasy light and did almost nothing to keep out the cold. Glass was for churches and nobles, not for people like you who worked the land from sunrise to sunset and still couldn't guarantee your family would eat. The typical peasant cottage measured perhaps 15 by 30 feet for your entire extended family. Parents, children, grandparents, and on the coldest nights, your livestock too. That's right, you'd bring the pig inside, not because you'd grown fond of it, though you had, but because that pig represented months of meals. If it froze to death overnight, your family might starve before spring, so you'd share your already cramped smoke-filled space with a 200-pound pig, some chickens, maybe a goat if you were prosperous. The smell was beyond description, a mixture of smoke, unwashed bodies, animal waste, rotting straw, and whatever was bubbling in the eternal pot of pottage that never stopped cooking from October to April. At the center of your one-room hovel sat your only source of warmth, an open fire pit with no chimney, no fireplace. Just a circle of stones on the dirt floor with flames that had to burn constantly or everyone would freeze. The smoke had nowhere to go except up through that hole in your roof. Eventually, first it filled your home, stinging your eyes until tears streamed down your face, blackening your lungs with every breath, coating everything you owned in a layer of greasy soot. But here's the real nightmare that kept you awake at night. Firewood. A medieval family needed approximately 45 kilograms of wood every single day just for heating, not counting what you needed for cooking. And you couldn't simply walk into the forest and take it. Those trees belonged to your lord. Get caught stealing wood and you'd face fines you could possibly pay or punishments that ranged from having your hands cut off to being blinded. The forest laws of medieval England were brutally enforced because timber was wealth, and peasants were expendable. Instead, you gathered fallen branches, twigs, and dried peat from bogs, wading into partially frozen marshland in weather that could kill you, cutting blocks of compressed plant matter with specialized spades, then hauling them home on your back. Each waterlogged block weighed several pounds. You'd need hundreds to survive the winter. The work was backbreaking and dangerous. Men fell through thin ice and drowned in frozen bogs. Women collapsed from exhaustion and hypothermia while gathering kindling. And if you ran out of fuel in January, your options were limited and terrifying. You could burn your furniture, then your roof beams, and finally freeze to death in the ruins of your own home. Chronicles from the period record families doing exactly this, burning their houses piece by piece until the structure collapsed and buried them in debris. Some tried portable braziers, metal pans filled with hot coals that could be moved around the room. It sounds clever until you realize these were essentially carbon monoxide factories that killed entire families in their sleep, or fire hazards that turned straw and mud houses into infernos within minutes. Your medieval winter wardrobe was all about one fabric: wool. Wool tunics, wool cloaks, wool leggings, wool everything. Not because it was fashionable, but because wool stayed relatively warm even when soaked through with snow and sweat. The wealthy had furs from exotic animals. You had rabbit pelts if you were lucky, catskin if you were desperate. Yes, catskin. Medieval sumptuary laws actually specified that peasants could only wear the furs of common animals, so you'd skin the family cat if it meant your children might survive the night. Most peasants owned exactly one set of clothes, maybe two if they were prosperous by village standards. Washing them meant breaking ice on a stream with your bare hands, scrubbing with lye soap that burned your skin raw, then waiting days for everything to dry by the fire while you sat naked or wrapped in rags. Most people chose to stay filthy for months. Better to stink and itch than to freeze to death while your only clothes dried. At night, you slept fully clothed in everything you owned: tunic, leggings, cloak, and most importantly, a cap. Medieval people understood what modern science has confirmed: you lose enormous amounts of body heat through your head. Going to bed without a nightcap was considered nearly suicidal. Families didn't share beds for comfort or companionship. They piled together for survival, breathing each other's diseased breath all night long, spreading illness in the darkness while praying they'd wake up in the morning and not find one of the children cold and stiff beside them. Your winter diet was an exercise in monotony and slow malnutrition. Every single meal centered on two things: dark bread made from rye or barley because wheat was for wealthy people who didn't work the fields, and pottage, a grey slop of whatever vegetables you'd managed to store, boiled into a paste with the consistency of wallpaper glue and significantly less flavor. A typical pottage contained dried peas, beans, turnips, onions, and barley, all thrown into a pot with water and cooked until it formed something you could choke down if you were hungry enough. If you were fortunate, you might add a bone with a few scraps of meat still clinging to it, though by February that bone had been boiled so many times it was starting to disintegrate. The pot never stopped cooking. You just added more water and whatever ingredients remained as needed, creating an eternal stew that got progressively more questionable as winter dragged on. By late winter, that pot had been simmering for 4 months straight. The bottom was a layer of charred sediment. The contents were unidentifiable, but you ate it anyway because the alternative was starvation. November was slaughter month, the time when any pig you couldn't afford to feed through winter got killed, and every single part was used because waste meant death. The meat was salted until it could survive decades without spoiling, preserved in so much salt that eating it made your tongue burn and your throat ache for water you didn't have. The blood was mixed with oats to make black pudding. The intestines were stuffed with organs to make sausages. Even the bladder was saved to store lard. By February, that salt pork was your only protein, and it tasted like eating leather that had been soaked in seawater for months. Fresh vegetables didn't exist. Fruit was a memory from summer that seemed impossibly distant. Vitamin C was something you'd never heard of. But by late winter, scurvy was setting in whether you understood it or not. Your gums bled when you touched them. Your joints ached constantly. Wounds refused to heal. The spring sickness that medieval people described was likely mild scurvy, finally catching up after months of nutritional deficiency that left your body eating itself from the inside. Storage was primitive but absolutely crucial to survival. Root vegetables went into pits dug in the floor and covered with sand and straw, hoping the rats wouldn't find them. Grain was stored in sacks that vermin constantly tried to raid. When medieval chroniclers, who had seen plague and war and every imaginable horror, write about cannibalism with genuine shock in their words, you know things got apocalyptically bad. If you're watching this and feeling grateful for your heated home and full refrigerator, please consider subscribing. We explore the darkest corners of history, the experiences that reveal just how fragile human survival has always been. These stories matter because they show us how far we've come and how quickly comfort can disappear. Your subscription helps us keep uncovering these forgotten horrors. Winter didn't mean rest for medieval peasants. The fields were frozen, yes, but survival required constant backbreaking labor in conditions that could kill you. Wood gathering was a daily necessity, even with a stockpile, which meant trudging through knee-deep snow with hands so numb you could barely grip an axe. Water had to be fetched daily from wells or streams, which meant breaking through ice with rocks, lowering buckets into frigid water, then hauling them home where they'd freeze again within hours. Spill water on yourself in sub-zero temperatures and you'd better reach shelter fast or risk hypothermia. Animals still needed tending. Cattle and sheep required feeding from your dwindling hay stores. Their water troughs had to be freed from ice. Their shelters mucked out in weather that turned your fingers blue. Lose a cow in winter and your family might starve. All of this had to be done in conditions where staying outside too long was a death sentence. Your medieval winter home wasn't just cold and smoky, it was a disease factory. Everyone in your family, plus whatever livestock you'd brought inside, shared the same sealed space for months, breathing the same air, spreading the same illnesses. When one person coughed, everyone got sick. Respiratory infections were the real killers of winter. What started as a simple cold progressed to bronchitis, then pneumonia. Without antibiotics, pneumonia was often a death sentence. You'd lie in bed coughing blood while your family watched helplessly, knowing there was nothing they could do except wait to see if you'd survive or join the pile of bodies waiting for spring thaw when the ground would be soft enough to dig graves. The constant smoke from your hearth made everything worse. Irritating lungs, already weakened by cold and damp and malnutrition. Tuberculosis, already endemic in medieval populations, spread rapidly in these conditions. Medieval texts describe the consumption that left victims coughing blood while slowly wasting away over months, their families watching them disappear bit by bit. The crowding was devastating for disease transmission. Influenza would tear through a village in days. What medieval people called winter fever or the sweating sickness was probably flu, and it killed without discrimination. Children and elderly were especially vulnerable. In a bad winter, 20% of children might not survive to see spring flowers bloom, but disease wasn't the only threat lurking in the darkness. Hypothermia claimed victims with terrifying regularity. Fall asleep too far from the fire and you might never wake up. Step outside to relieve yourself at night and collapse in the snow. Your body not found until months later when the snow melted to reveal frozen corpses scattered around the village. Frostbite was so common that medieval medical texts devoted entire chapters to it, though their treatments basically amounted to hoping the affected parts didn't rot and fall off. Personal hygiene in winter was essentially non-existent. Lice and fleas lived in the seams of clothes that were never washed, spreading typhus that could kill within weeks. Your unwashed body, unwashed clothes, and unwashed bedding created perfect conditions for infection. A small cut could turn septic. A tooth infection could spread to your brain and kill you in agony. Without antibiotics, without even basic antiseptics, your immune system fought alone against threats that would be trivial to treat today. Medieval medicine often made things worse rather than better. Bloodletting was the standard treatment for fevers because surely what a sick, malnourished person needs is to lose blood. Healers prescribed poultices made from pigeon dung for pneumonia or suggested drinking your own urine for stomach ailments. The lucky might get willow bark tea, which actually contained aspirin's chemical precursor, but most remedies ranged from useless to actively harmful. Beyond the slow killers of cold and disease, winter brought sudden death in numerous ways. House fires were devastatingly common. One knocked over candle, one spark catching the thatch, and your entire home could be consumed in minutes. In winter, surviving the fire meant nothing if you had nowhere to go. Your neighbors were already cramped and short on food. Many fire victims simply froze to death in the ruins of their homes, having survived the flames only to succumb to the cold. Roof collapses killed entire families when heavy snow accumulated until the weight became too much. The beams would crack, usually at night when everyone was sleeping, bringing down tons of snow and timber. Not because you were weak, but because survival required knowledge and resources and community support that took a lifetime to build. Medieval people weren't tougher than us. They were just more familiar with suffering and death, and they knew that winter was when the veil between life and death became tissue thin. Could you have survived a medieval winter? Could anyone raised with central heating and antibiotics and grocery stores? It's easy to romanticize the past until you realize that past smells like manure and smoke, tastes like salt pork and desperation, and feels like cold that seeps into your bones and never quite leaves. That's the truth about medieval winter. It wasn't an adventure. It was a test of endurance that millions failed, year after year, century after century, until finally technology and medicine made winter merely uncomfortable instead of lethal. We've forgotten what it means to truly fear the cold, to know that December might be the last month you ever see. Maybe that's progress, or maybe we've just traded one kind of fragility for another. Would you have survived? Could you make it through even one medieval winter with nothing but what a 14th century peasant possessed? Share your honest thoughts in the comments below, because confronting historical reality forces us to confront something uncomfortable about ourselves and our dependence on modern comfort.